Hi, Dr. Navani. How are you?
Good. How are you? Can you see?
Good. What was that?
Okay. No, just got a little dark. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No,
My
nice to see you.
yeah, it's nice seeing you. How was the uh Headache Society meeting last week?
Amazing. I feel like it's always so fun. I feel like my favorite part is to connect with everyone in the headache. It's like headache summer camp. I feel like we all just like sort of go. Actually, that was the theme this year. It was like headache camp. We roast marshmallows. We all talk headache. It was great.
That's awesome. Well, I think we'll get started now. So today's episode is episode 2, and it's tailoring exercise to your migraine and building sustainable habits. Hi, my name is Sam Kalakidis, and I'm a physical therapist in Philadelphia, where I see people for headache and migraine disorders. And joining me is Dr. Laura Navani, a board-certified neurologist and fellowship-trained headache specialist. And she's the founder and medical director of Integrative Headache Medicine of New York and serves as an assistant clinical professor of neurology in Mount Sinai's Icahn School of Medicine. Thank you for joining with me today.
Again, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So again, like what I said, today is our episode on tailoring exercise to people's specific migraine. But the first question I kind of wanted to ask you was, can you explain like the different phases of migraine, with like ictal and interictal, and how that affects a person's ability to exercise?
Absolutely. So when we think of ictal means when you're in an attack. So ictal is when you're in a headache or migraine attack, which can be 4 phases, which I'll go into in a second. And interictal is the time between attacks, but it doesn't necessarily mean normal. It means that you might still overall be more sensitive. You might still have light sensitivity. There still might be symptoms, but you're not in the midst of an attack.
Mm-hmm.
So I look at it as like these big hills and then troughs going up and down. And then a migraine attack itself is not just headache. I feel like that's what we think about, but the headache phase is one phase. There's the prodrome, which can start up to a day before to hours before, which can be warning signs like neck pain. I feel like neck pain is a big one that could be a warning sign a migraine is coming.
Mm-hmm.
Then about 25% of people have the aura phase, which can be the flashy, sparkly lights, numbness, tingling, slurred speech. And then that can last for up to an hour. Then the headache phase, which usually lasts between 4 to 72 hours. And then the postrum, or I call it the migraine hangover. And that could be one of the most debilitating parts of all. Even if the pain is gone, the aftermath, it's like the aftermath of the earthquake. It's you're tired, you might be sore, you might be more sensitive. So some people go through all 4 phases every time, some just go through one. It really depends on the person.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any specific types of recommendations for being physically active or exercising based on the phase? So I guess we could start with like the prodrome phase. Is there any like guidance you have for engaging in activity during the prodromal phase of that cycle?
So this is more anecdotal, but I do find if patients are able to exercise at the prodrome, it can prevent the headache phase. We know
Hmm.
that certain medications, for example, that are taken at prodrome can prevent the headache phase by working on certain chemicals. And we think if you're doing exercise and producing endorphins to have these natural pain relievers can be preventative to stop the progression. So I do have
Hmm.
patients who find that some cardiovascular exercise can be helpful.
Yeah,
Going later on,
I've seen that.
sorry, go ahead.
I've seen that too anecdotally. It's like a light walk, something that's like below your kind of like modern intensity walk, where you're getting your heart rate slightly elevated, but not to where like what would be considered modern
Yeah.
intensity can be helpful. And for those that you mentioned it earlier that have like the neck pain as part of their prodrome, where it's actually being referred as the precursor to that migraine attack or headache phase, doing some light neck exercises and helping with that can desensitize that area. And that's been helpful for some of my patients, but that's been mostly anecdotal, not something that I've seen as far as like research or evidence based has been helpful yet.
Oh, I do think the neck, like I have patients who will like go for a massage, for example. And if the
Mhm.
massage is at the wrong time, it will trigger. But if it's at the prodrome, it can be preventative. So I think it all depends. It's true, like when you hit it.
Yeah,
We know that
exactly.
later on, once you're all the way deep into the headache phase, exercise by definition of what migraine is, exertion will worsen. But
Yes.
it depends on the person. Some people find that, again, even early in the headache phase, it can be helpful, or light exercise or just moving around can overall alleviate fresh air. Like I feel
Mhm.
like whether it's the exercise, the fresh air, oxygenation, that can help. But I think when someone is in the midst of the most severe part of a migraine attack, exercise is extremely difficult.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what about the postdrome?
So the postdrome, again, purely anecdotal. I find it's hard to exercise if you're tired, if you're sluggish, if you feel hungover, but that exercise can help aid in recovery. So this is where I found some gentle yoga to be helpful. Some more, again, not full-fledged going to run a marathon, but more gentle exercise, maybe some resistance training and some light cardio can help speed up the recovery. Have you had a similar experience?
Yeah, especially for people that are experiencing brain fog or that fatigue, sometimes engaging in exercise and not like an exercise that's, moderate to vigorous or vigorous exercise where that is in itself probably more fatiguing, but engaging in like light, moderate to moderate intensity
Mhm.
exercise really helps stimulate the body again. And I think that helps you get back into your energy systems faster after that migraine attack for them.
I agree, but it's so hard to do. I feel like it's sometimes the last thing you want to do, which
Oh,
is why I
yeah.
say just do something gentle, but getting
Hmm.
up and moving propels your body to start recovering.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I've worked on with patients before is creating kind of like a plan where it starts light, and if you feel like, hey, I'm starting to get more energy as I do more, here's how you progress it, but start with A and then add B and C. And I'm not sure what happened there. It just like said your live ended, and I'm
That's
like, I didn't even touch
what it said
anything.
to me. I was like, thanks for
I don't
letting me
know.
know.
I've been having trouble connecting today, so maybe it's something with the Instagram app. I don't know. But we'll kind of get back into it. I guess the next question is, how can somebody with chronic migraine, somebody that's having attacks more frequently or might have more, consistent days with migraine attack, safely incorporate regular exercise into their routines without really exacerbating their symptoms?
It's a great question. And this is where you were talking about interictal versus ictal. Patients who have chronic migraine have fewer interictal and more ictal, so they're more up and down. And it's harder to pinpoint when is the right time to exercise. So
Hmm.
I say making a routine starting slow, gradual introduction of continuous exercise. So starting small. So even if you are having more pain, if you're chronic and having pain most of the time, we have to still schedule it in and
Hmm.
not really base it on where things are in the pain cycle.
Yeah. And one of the things I've worked on with clients for that is that we create that like baseline. Here's what we can do, whether you're in an attack or not an attack, or depending on where they are. And then we create a plan on what you can do when you're outside of that, like when you're feeling really good, but setting parameters on it so they don't overdo it. Cause that's a kind of
Exactly.
problem I see is like, but I felt so good, so I did more. It's
Always.
like, but your body wasn't built up for that. Like your capacity was so much as far as like your migraine threshold was in related. Like yes, physically your muscles and your cardiovascular system are able to tolerate that, but your nervous system is not ready for that yet. So we need to really rein people in sometimes that are, especially if they're really motivated to exercise.
I totally agree. I feel like when people are feeling good, they go all out. And then I look at migraine, you need that equilibrium. Like going either all out or doing nothing at all is not going to be a good thing. So I kind of
Hmm.
feel like the worst thing is you go all out, you like run and run and run. The next day you're so exhausted, you don't want to do it again. It has to
Hmm.
take little steps. Even if you're, like you said, even if your body can do it, your brain is still not quite caught up yet.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Um, I guess my next question, could you share some insights on how exercise might influence the frequency and severity of a migraine attack during an attack? Well, I guess we kind of already talked about that. I guess over the course of migraine for somebody over the month.
Yeah, so studies have shown that exercise can be just as beneficial as daily medications such as Topamax for
Mhm.
reducing overall frequency, but I liken it to starting any preventative medication. It's not immediate. I give it at least 2 to 3 months of being consistent, and you have to build up. Just like most medications, you have to titrate up. You have to go up in the dose. You have to go up in exercise.
Mhm.
So it is preventive, but it's not immediate. And we have to put it in the context of if I'm feeling worse in the moment, just like side effects. Things can have side effects, still pushing
Mhm.
through to get to the end. So I will say, of all the lifestyle recommendations we recommend for migraine, exercise is one of my top two most evidence based and best preventive treatments, along with sleep,
Mhm.
for decrease in overall migraine frequency. I think it's just working with someone like yourself to sort of implement it is the hard part to
Yeah.
start.
And like for what I do, I really, when I'm sitting down in a consultation session with somebody, I talk about like, in this instance, exercise is just like medicine. And it's something where like you need to take it on time and you need to be consistent about it. But just like medicine, it might have some side effects that we are trying to monitor. And we might have to titrate your dose of that intervention depending on how your body responds. And over time, we'd like to increase your dose of exercise to an amount we find suitable or that meets your lifestyle goals. But we need time to do that. And that, again, 2 to 3 months, but it's really something where like, you're not going to stop at 2 to 3 months and all of a sudden be better. It's,
Exactly.
we're really working on, this needs to be just like you taking all your other medications or any other responsibility you have, that it becomes a lifestyle habit. And how do you make this part of your daily or weekly life cycle?
Exactly. I call it a prescription for exercise, and then how to make exercise a part of your daily life. So it's something you do every day. It's not something that you have to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're right. If you're on preventive medication for migraine and you stop it, things might go back. I feel like exercise could be that foundation where it's there and it's good for so many different things, but
Mm-hmm.
continuing it will just be more beneficial down the road.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have any, common misconceptions you often hear from patients about exercise that might prevent somebody with migraine from being active?
I think the misconception is that exercise is going to make me feel worse.
Mm-hmm.
And it's looking again, short term, long term, where and when you're doing it and what exercise. So I think just blatantly saying exercise, it's like saying the world. Like, what is it? It's like a huge thing. Like, we need
Mm-hmm.
to make that more specific. Sure, maybe running and pounding is going to make things worse right now, but what about more light, gentle exercise? So I say people come and they say, I can't exercise because it makes everything worse. And I think that is a misconception I try to address, because no, you have to just do it the right way.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that probably is the biggest one. Do you have ones that people come with?
Yeah, I think one that come here is that like part of the diagnostic criteria for migraine is that it's worsened by physical activity, but really the diagnostic criteria is relating to like that ictal phase itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's outside of the ictal phase that you can still be physically active. And then within it, yeah, there's more precautions, and it's not a red flag, don't exercise. It's more of like a yellow flag. It's like there's some more parameters and precautions we need about it, and there's times you can and times you can't. But outside of that migraine attack cycle, we can become physically active, and it's just learning what's right for you and your body, and then getting active or doing exercise in ways that you enjoy. So like, if you don't like running, you don't have to run. We can find ways for you to be active depending on what you like.
Correct. And I think that a diagnostic criteria is very different from like an actual experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have to meet every diagnostic criteria every time. And just because something is worsened by physical exertion in that moment doesn't mean it's worse in general. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in that moment, might it feel worse? But maybe an hour later, after you produce those endorphins, it might be better. So I
Mm-hmm.
think just putting it in that
Yeah,
context.
and I think that's a good way to explain that. In terms of like realistic goal setting, do you have any advice you would give to one of your patients about starting an exercise program to help manage migraine?
Yeah. So I usually say, what are you doing now? So we need to have a baseline. If they're doing nothing, I literally aim for literally 5 minutes. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I feel like 5 minutes doing it a few times a week, and then building up either in minutes, in duration, or in intensity over time. So I try to go by more the modified Levine protocol. Like I said, it's basically this
Mm-hmm.
gradual build up in time, in intensity, and then going from more seated recumbent type of exercise to more standing, and more an exercise that is more all body and exertional. But it's usually pick something you like. Let's say we're going to go on the bike, and we're going to go on the bike for 5 minutes on a Tuesday and Thursday at 5 p.m. You're
Mm-hmm.
stopping after 5 minutes, even if you want to keep doing it forever. Then, okay, the next week. Now we're going to go for 7 minutes and maybe add an additional day. And then I go from there. And then after a while, I might do some heart rate monitoring and then talk about incorporating strength. But it's really just starting super, super simple.
Yeah.
What about you?
I normally find that people set realistic goals. They're like, I want to do, walk or bike for, 3 days a week for 30 to, 45 minutes. I'm like, that's a great place. But I also find that people, when they're having problems doing that, that's also where they're starting. They're starting at that goal point where it's like, with a chronic condition, that's not really where we should be starting. Somebody that might be healthy and just trying to get back into physical activity, they might be able to jump back into 3 times a week for 30 minutes right away. But for somebody with a chronic condition, especially a neurological one, they might need to really assess where their baseline is. And then we build from there depending on what it is. And again, like you said, sometimes 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day, and doing a variety of things, especially if they don't know what they enjoy, trying different things out, seeing if it bothers you, see if it doesn't bother you. Did you like it? Did you not? Because I think the path of least resistance for most patients is if you like it, you will do it more. And if you hate it, you will do it less.
And let's say, for example, they really like watching a certain show, or just there's something they really like. I try to say, okay, how can we associate it so you get to do what you like
Hmm.
with this activity, make it fun and enjoyable? Because you're right, if someone hates doing something, they are never going to do it.
Yeah, so usually if somebody really doesn't like it, and I get those patients who are like, I just want to exercise enough to be healthier and have a better quality of life living with migraine, but really I hate exercise. It's like, well, if you hate exercise, what we're going to do is the first thing in the morning, because the later you put it in the day, the more likely you are to drop it from your schedule. And that's something where we don't want to do. We want to make sure it's part of your life. So you do that right after you wake up and eat, or like right before you go to work. And that's how we kind of like program that.
I look at it as it takes time to build a habit. So I think it takes 2 weeks of doing something consistently to build a habit. I look at it like with my kids. I'm like, I want you to eat broccoli. You don't like broccoli. So I'm going to give you broccoli a little bit every night and increase it. Just having the introduction to it and it being there, starting to adapt it. After a while, your brain can start to maybe not love it,
Hmm.
but to like it enough so it's tolerable. And then the endorphins that feed back over time, you do start to like
Yep.
it. It just takes a
Yeah.
long time.
And that's where you talked about before, associating with something you do enjoy, and that can really do help improve like your enjoyment around exercise because it's there's something else that you enjoy with it. Yes.
Mhm.
How important is flexibility in an exercise schedule for somebody with migraine?
So I think we've talked about this before, is that I feel like people might not think they're flexible, but be hypermobile. And I
Hmm.
think that stretching and being flexible really doesn't have much to do with, unless you want to prevent injury. Like obviously we shouldn't be running a marathon without properly stretching. But I think people spend a lot of time on stretching because of pain instead of working on strengthening
Hmm.
to reduce the muscle spasms to decrease the pain. So I don't put a lot of emphasis. I do more dynamic stretching, like with active motion, to do maybe like walking dynamic movements. What
Hmm.
about you?
Yeah, I really tend, if somebody is hypermobile, we definitely don't stretch. And even for most of my patients that are, quote unquote, stiffer or less mobile, I rarely ever incorporate stretching. And that's just because of how it affects the nervous system and muscle performance. So prolonged stretching does slightly impair, motor control for a period of time afterwards. And for a lot of my patients, they talk about having that heaviness of the head or difficulty holding their head up, especially towards the end of a day of work, and it's because the muscles are getting tired. So what happens when you start stretching is that, yes, it feels good in that moment during the stretch, but then afterwards, that muscle is now more inhibited, so it's not as strong to hold the head up, and you've fatigued it more. So now you've further compromised your neck's ability to hold your head up, and I feel like that's exacerbated a lot of my patients. It makes it more likely for them to have the headache. So traditionally, what I do is I teach them a light strengthening and like muscle activation program to really help support their postural muscles, to help them get through that day and not overstimulate the muscles of their neck that might trigger a migraine attack for them.
100%. And if people want things that are going to be more like stretching, like there's heat, there's like, I like using sometimes infrared. I like doing things that basically can relax from the inside instead of stretching
Hmm.
and doing more of this muscle elongation. Because I do find, like you said, it doesn't help.
No, and like, yeah, we're stretching the muscles, but we're also stretching other structures. We're stretching the nerves, and nerves don't like to be stretched. And if you're having this peripheral sensitization from that nerve that's, activating your central nervous system, that can be triggering attacks for many people. It's why I don't usually uh, prescribe stretching for the majority of my patients unless they really have some impairment of mobility in that
And that's
sense.
a really important point, because I think when people think about pain, they think about tightness, and they think about stretching, but I think most people don't realize that stretching is not the treatment. So I'm really glad we brought
Yeah,
attention to that.
yeah. What strategies do you find most effective for helping patients maintain long-term habits? We kind of touched on this a little bit a couple questions ago.
I think you need accountability, and I think you need check-in, and I also think there needs to be something that's in it for you. So I always make short-term and long-term goals with my patients, and I say, okay, I'm going to see you back in X amount of
Hmm.
time. Here's what I would like to happen. Obviously, do the best you can, but if we're sitting here a year from now and things are not completely different, then we really haven't met our goals. So basically setting goals, having someone to check in with, because I feel like if nobody is checking in with you, or you
Hmm.
don't have any accountability, it's more difficult. That's why I feel like if you have a gym membership or you're doing a class, or if you have or you're basically checking in, or I make my patients, I advise them to basically keep a diary of what they're doing. And I actually review it. I say, send it to me so I can review it. I think having that accountability is important. And then also setting goals and rewards for yourself. Just knowing that like doing something is not going to just do it. Like, yes, maybe decrease in migraine days is the end goal, but we need short-term rewards as well.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point that some people don't think about. They talk about accountability all the time, and either getting a workout partner or a coach or a personal trainer to help you stay consistent. But that reward part, some way that says I worked hard, I'm going to reward myself because of that hard work, and that the reward's more than just like having a better quality of life living with migraine. It's something you might enjoy, like I'm going to treat myself at the spa, or I'm going to get a pedicure, or I'm going to do this thing that makes me feel really good inside too, is also a good way to reward yourself for staying consistent for things that are really hard.
Yeah. I will say in a time where I don't do much screens, I'm like, okay, my favorite TV show, I want to watch an episode. This is the time. Like if I do this all, then I'll dedicate this 1 hour to relaxing and watching. It doesn't have to be something you buy. It doesn't have to be monetary. It could just be something that you want to do that you might not otherwise reward yourself with.
Yeah, no, that's a great point as well. That's awesome. Is there any other tips or tricks you have for helping people build kind of that sustainable habit or resources that they can look at?
I think the first thing that you said is habit, is that it takes time to build any habit, both positive and negative. So I think we need to look at exercise in that context, not think of it as this huge, scary, big bad wolf, but we are trying to change our habits for long-term overall success. So I think all the things that we talked about going gradual, finding something that you like is important. Overall resources, I think I've had trouble finding resources because everybody is so different. They need a personalized approach. What works for them won't work for someone else. So that's where I find that more one-to-one counseling, getting basically an exercise program written out for you, at least to start with, is helpful. I feel like there are some apps out there, like some guided exercises, even things like Beachbody, which has like some guided programs. Even just starting with something light and small and doing it in small doses is somewhere to start. But obviously, best case scenario, someone who can do a personal program.
Yeah, and that's something I've seen with clients and work with them on, and just like you explained, like finding something easy, but there are a portion of people that need an individualized program. So when people like ask me first and they're considering like maybe joining a program or not joining a program, I always throw out there like you can always go and try out exercise on your own. There are many people that can be successful with migraine and do that and just find like they just need to become physically active. It really doesn't matter what they do. And you have the portion of people that really need that customization to really figure out, especially if they have like an exercise related trigger, whether it's cardiovascular or strength based trigger, that, if you're being triggered by like an overhead press, or you're being triggered anytime your heart rate goes above 130, that we can tailor exercise to you, give you a more specific exercise prescription to help you build into exercise levels that you want to. But you can always try exercise on your own first, come for help if you are struggling to make progression or engage in it.
Yeah, I think definitely if you're having trouble starting, I think that's the thing, is once you start and you get that momentum, sometimes it's easier. But if you're having trouble starting, I think that's also a perfect time just to reach out for guidance.
Exactly. I agree. Well, great. I think that's all the questions I have. Is there anything else you wanted to add for today's talk?
I think we covered it all. I think just getting over that initial hump is the hardest thing.
Yes, I agree. So I think the next time we meet is in 2 weeks, because next week's Thanksgiving, so we're not meeting that week. So we meet in 2 weeks, and I think that'll be episode 3, and that will be recognizing, managing triggers, and overcoming problems that do arise during exercise. So we'll get more into detail about like what to do when you start exercising and triggers that are commonly popping up with clients that we have.
Perfect. I look forward to it.
Likewise. All right. Have a great day and enjoy your Thanksgiving.
You too.
Bye.